Let's talk a little bit about the role of a pollster. Actually, I was sort of joking or even making fun that your title is you were Director of Insights, because everyone has to have a fancy, cool name now.
Of course.
Polling would be too restrictive. But you worked in many political campaigns. When you were working for Mark Mellman, you were a pollster in many political campaigns, and now you're part of a team. Probably relatively few of the folks who are taking this class are going to end up being nerds like us and actually be doing the polls. But they are going to be consuming polls, and we're going to get to that. But they're also going to be managing a team of consultants. So maybe without naming names, but tell a couple stories or examples of when you've seen it, probably mostly from your campaign experience, but could also be from corporate work, when it's worked best in terms of a pollster being integrated with the whole team, and maybe when you've seen it not work so well, aside from the stats, aside from the numbers.
Right. I think from an organizational perspective, when you think about organizing a campaign, the traditional way of organizing is you hire a bunch of roles, and those are the pollster, the media consultant, the campaign manager, the fundraiser, and of course everything to do with digital these days, of course, which is your web director and maybe a social director. The problem with that model is that it's all about arguing. It's all about figuring out who's right. And one of the real problems I think that pollsters face, or that you'll find in a pollster, is that they have a ton invested in being right all the time. And we can talk about that in a little bit, because I think that...
And to their credit, one of the few jobs where there actually is an answer.
That's right. To their credit, and sometimes to their shock when they turn out to be wrong. But what that ends up creating is a real battle. And I think if you're a candidate running for office, and this is where I think polling can go wrong, but that whole organizational structure can go wrong, is that sometimes their interests are not aligned with your interests. There are sometimes when the media consultant may be more interested in producing and putting the next ad out because they have a financial incentive to do that. Or the pollster may be more interested in proving that he or she is right than they are in finding the best strategy for you. So I think that dynamic is something that every candidate needs to be sure that they either have a strong campaign manager who can manage all of that, or that they themselves can be sure that they're really getting the best advice when there are sometimes conflicts of interest inherent when you bring in someone from the outside.
Talk a little bit about sort of those initial, we've talked about different polls that a campaign might do.
Right.
And you might do something fairly short to figure out your credibility, and you can do some sort of a benchmark poll. And I always say that I'm always scared when I get too little input from other consultants, and I'm always too annoyed when I get too much input from other consultants. But talk about, you as the pollster would definitely do the first draft, and give some hints about running maybe that first meeting and taking in the suggestions of different folks, or managing that meeting.
Right. I think that's an important part early on the process, is who is driving the research process. In a lot of ways, it has to be the pollster from a methodological standpoint. They need to be able to say, here's our approach we're taking, here's the cadence we want to keep up, and here's my overall theory of how we're going to do it. And some, these days there's new types of polling, so it's not just a telephone poll, it may be online surveys, they may use you can use input from IVR and those types of automated surveys to get input into what the decisions will be for voters. But with that said, it has to be set up in a way that it can then coordinate across the different folks. One I think my biggest learnings working as a pollster is that too often it's hands off, and the pollster goes and writes the poll, and the pollster writes the messages, and then the media consultant or the ad maker will then go ahead and make whatever ad he or she wants to make. And the pollster comes and says, well, we found that protecting families was an important piece of language. And then the media consultant says, well, my art director wants to say, protecting children. And then you get into the semantic argument. So I think that it's a very delicate balance between who runs the show on the research side and how what you use can be used across the campaign.
When you're coming up with some sort of message testing battery, so the opposition research wizard has come and given you some possible arguments. Do you take the first crack at crafting that, or did you, when you were doing this, take the
Yes.
first crack at crafting that, or would you then work with creative people? Because for it to work the best, right, it should be the exact same language that they're then
That's
going
right.
to use in any sort of
That's right.
communication.
Okay.
But in reality, how does it work?
In reality, what ends up happening is the pollster tends to take the first crack. And I think one thing we do, not to toot Purple's horn, what we do at our firm is that we really work in conjunction with each other, where when we do research, it is a team effort where we bring the creative people, the strategists, the people that understand the client all in one room to get a sense of what we're trying to learn, what our potential message positioning may be, and what the language should be, to be sure that when we put it in the field, that it comes out with something that can be used. In practice, especially in the world of campaigns, and I think this is something for everyone who's thinking about running for office and managing campaigns, these consultants are all very, very, very busy. And you have your pollster who may have 8, 10, 12 other races, some cases even dozens more. And they won't have the time to coordinate, so they'll just write a list of messages and they'll decide what to do. And I think it's important that they take that next step and they take a little while to work with the media team, who also has 10 or 12 or dozens of other clients that they're working on, to try to get that done in advance. Because without that coordination in advance, you buy this expensive poll, you do this work, and then you have disagreement over what the ad actually should do and not a database solution.